Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Lagore, and welcome to another episode of the Skywatcher USA, or just Skywatcher, actually. The Skywatcher What's Up webcast, and we do this every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, and they're generally about an hour long. And the goal of the webcast is really just to kind of share anything and everything that is astronomy. And each week we try to make the topic a little bit different. So if you ever want to go back and kind of explore or reference it, we make the episodes really kind of easy and focused on one major topic. And of course, this is a live webcast, but it is recorded. So if you ever miss it or there's something you need to reference, they are recorded and they are on the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. If you enjoy seeing these webcasts and you want to see what's coming, you can also subscribe to the Skywatcher USA channel, and then that way you get alerts and emails of when we're doing another video and what might be the topic for that week. And like I said, we try to do one of these every week, every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific. This is actually the 20th episode. We've kind of burned through these really quickly. So thanks for all of you who are joining us this morning, no matter where you are, or if you're watching this as a recorded event. So this week's topic is we're going to be discussing objects beyond the Messier Catalog. And anybody who's just getting into astronomy, or anyone who's been into astronomy as well, obviously knows that the Messier Catalog is kind of the first set of objects that you start hunting or observing or photographing or whatever you want to do. And it's a great collection of objects to go view. And a lot of them are very, very easy to see. In a variety of different telescope apertures and sizes. But that's generally where we all start. So let me get myself out of the way really quick here, just so we can get all of this. There we go. So the Messier Catalog, of course, is a collection of 110 objects that was originally documented by Charles Messier, a French astronomer, in, I believe, the 1700s era. Actually, it might be a little bit off on that one. So, regardless, they are kind of I like to call it the greatest hits of the astronomy catalog, because this is generally the objects that we've all started with, and a lot of us go back to sharing and viewing and imaging throughout our entire career in amateur astronomy. And they're a beautiful collection of objects. However, what I wanted to do on this webcast is kind of explain what sits beyond that. So just to kind of cover up everything real quick, you have the Messier Catalog, 110 objects. Of course, they're made of clusters, nebulas, and galaxies. And there is actually one double star in the Messier Catalog. That's M40. If you ever want to take that and check it out. And these are easily visible in telescopes. I have 8-inch, but from a dark sky site, you can probably see the majority of these in at least a 3-inch telescope, maybe a little bit bigger, but an 8-inch telescope from average skies will allow you to catch a good chunk of these without a lot of effort, but getting it out to dark skies can be good to explore a little bit more. But the goal of this week is to actually encourage people to venture out into deeper waters, if you will. The Messier Catalog is excellent. It's a fun group of objects. All of us go back looking at them. They're constantly photographed and shared. Obviously, we see those, time and time again. And I'm not trying to say there's anything wrong with the Messier Catalog, but there's thousands of other things out there in the night sky to see and image and explore. And that was kind of the whole point of today's topic, is to encourage you, if you've been into this a while, you probably know some of this. But if you're new or you're looking for something that's a little bit more challenging, what I hope to get out of this webcast is to actually encourage others to dive off the deep end and see what's out there further. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to be going over several different catalogs of objects that exist. There are hundreds of catalogs, depending on numerous variables, generally evolving around surveys of the nighttime sky and depending on who's doing what and what the goal of the survey is. But that's generally how a catalog is put together. But I want to go over some of the basic ones, and maybe pushing into some of the more exotic catalogs. So that's what I'm hoping to get into today for anybody who wants to jump into the deep end. So with that being said, let's start off with probably actually it would be the next step above the Messier Catalog, and that of course is the NGC, or New General Catalog. Now NGCs was originally published in 1888, has a total of 7,840 objects in the catalog. And it's a combination of a large collection of different objects throughout the night sky, both northern and southern hemisphere, and it also encompasses all 110 Messier objects. So if you ever look at like Sky Safari or something like that, you'll actually notice that all the Messier objects have an NGC number as well. And the original goal of this back in the 1800s was to kind of have a catalog that encompassed all known celestial objects in the nighttime sky, distant objects, nebulas, galaxies, and clusters. Obviously not the planets or stars or anything like that, but mainly just the more distant objects. So the goal of this was to document all of those known objects under one master catalog, and that's why it was so large at the time, almost 8,000 objects. And for the most part, a lot of the NGC objects can actually be seen in a general size telescope. You know, you can catch a lot of them between telescopes somewhere between 6 to 12 inch, but some of the faintest ones you'll probably need upwards of an 18-inch to actually catch the whole catalog one by one. And as we move through each catalog this morning, I'm going to have a couple different just cool recommended objects. Some of them you've probably seen before. I'll have their constellations and a little bit of information about them. And we're actually covering this from both visual and photographic points. So I tried to have notes documenting both of those depending on what your goal is for the target. So the first one on there, of course, is one of my favorite regions in the entire night sky, and that's the Abell Nebula complex. This is a 4-panel mosaic shot with a Skywatcher Esprit 100 and a Starlight Express 16200 almost full frame sensor. It covers little over 3 degrees of the night sky. It's huge. So you're gonna need large optics, not large aperture optics, but wide field optics to see it. Larger sensors can also help increase that field of view. And this is also done in hydrogen alpha, so that's why you can see a lot of the details in there. But the Abell complex is actually made up of a large collection of nebulas. And it's a supernova remnant, so all of this remains from a massive star that died in a massive explosion. And it left over the remnants that we see here. And this whole region is made up of multiple NGC numbers. So we have NGC 6960, which is up here. That is the Western Veil. Then you have NGC 6992 and 95, which make up the Eastern Veil down here. And then you have all the little tendrils and stuff inside, which have all their own NGC numbers as well. So it's a complex of objects making up this one event that have occurred. And this is in the constellation of Cygnus. This is actually up right now in the northern hemisphere, nice and high, just after sunset in the summer months. We are recording this in September, so just after sunset, Cygnus sits really high, almost vertical for the northern hemisphere. So now would be the time to jump after this target if you want to take a look at it, especially as we start to get past the full moon that we had on the 2nd. This will be a really good object to go after and photograph. If you're going to dark skies, this is a very fun object. It looks really nice in telescopes around 8 inches or larger, but you will have to do kind of a tour of the region, kind of roping around one side to the other, where if you are in a dark enough location, I've seen it in telescopes as small as 80 millimeter, to get the entire field of view, the entire 3-degree field of this object using low power eyepieces like a 35 or a 40 or a 31 or something in that realm, depending on the focal length of your telescope. This is a very nice object to see. It looks like a pair of parentheses floating up in the nighttime sky. Now, if you are going to be imaging, it can be done visually, so your standard LRGB set, you can do that and get the natural colors of the object in there. But it does really well in narrow band, so if you've got, especially hydrogen and oxygen 3 filters, if you've got those, this is very easy to do in town. If you have an H-alpha filter, oxygen, there is some sulfur in there if you're doing the Hubble palette, but not a ton of it. It does really good in bicolor, so H-alpha and O3, and then of course you see just the black and white up on the screen there. That is just hydrogen. So it does really good for astrophotography, and it is something, when paired with narrowband filters, can be obtained from in-town viewing locations. This was actually shot from my backyard in Phoenix with a bright moon up, so a decent H-alpha filter, like 5 to 7 nanometer filter, would work really well at photographing this nebula region. You just need to make sure you've got a pretty wide field optic. Visually, like I said earlier, it's best done in dark skies. You can do about a 3-inch telescope to get the entire thing. It is going to be kind of faint, but increasing that aperture is going to help. Short tube refractors that are 100 millimeter in aperture with a 30 millimeter eyepiece can catch the whole thing. It gets really impressive in larger optics, 8-inch and bigger, because you can start to zoom in and see some of the fainter details. If you ever have a chance to see this in a large Dobsonian, like a 20-inch or bigger, with an O3 filter or UHC filter paired in the system, there's a lot of very elegant tendrils that kind of pan through the nebulas in there. It's really quite stunning. There's very few objects I find that are equal as far as the very fine ribbons of dust and material that's in this complex. So that's why it's one of my favorites. But that is the Veil Nebula complex. It's easy to find up in Cygnus, easy to photograph, and a very nice dark sky object. It can be a very tricky object in town depending on your location. If you have a backyard that's kind of shielded from glare and isn't, overly light polluted, you could possibly actually glimpse this from a light polluted location, like outskirts of town, not in the middle of town, with a oxygen 3 filter in the system, and probably like an 8-inch telescope. You'd probably get a ghostly image of it in there. So it's something that you can play with from home and see what you can get out of it. Next target is the Crescent Nebula. This is a very cool nebula that actually sits in a massive hydrogen-rich region up in Cygnus. That's why you see a lot of this is all red in the background. And then it obviously has this outer O3 oxygen bubble shell around it as well. Just a little bit about the Crescent. This is NGC 6888. It's also in Cygnus. It's an emission nebula. Also a Wolf-Rayet star, so a major star in there is dying, shedding off layers, and that outer material being pushed out is being intercepted by other stellar winds, causing this really dynamic brain-looking shell of an object floating out in space. This is a pretty easy one to actually shoot as well, especially if you're paired with narrowband filters. In town, this was shot in town with H-alpha and oxygen 3 filters. This is a bicolor image. So it's relatively easy with narrowband filters. Visual filters, LRGB filters or color filters. You'll probably want to have darker locations to really pull it out. This really does best with narrowband, particularly hydrogen. If you want to get that outer blue shell, you're going to need a fair amount of time in oxygen 3. This particular shot, this is 12 hours total exposure on a Skywatcher Esprit 150 with a Starlight 694, and it actually is using the Starzone Apex reducer to speed it up. But this is 6 hours in each channel, 12 hours total. So I've got 6 hours in hydrogen and 6 hours in oxygen, and they are 3 nanometer filters for this, so really cutting down to really getting in there. But that O3 outer shell, this blue shell that we see out here is very kind of cool if you're looking for a challenge to glimpse photographically. Getting that's kind of the challenge in the object here, is pulling out the O3 shell that sits there. You could shoot this in a color camera. Right now, especially nowadays with all these additional narrowband filters like the L-Enhance from Optolong or the Triad filters from the Radiant OPT brand, if you pair that up, you could get a lot of this relatively easily. You can shoot it in just normal color, but you'll probably have to expose for quite a while to get a lot of the detail out of the field there. So you see this done in narrowband quite often, but it can be done in color as well. Visually, this really needs a 10-inch or larger telescope to see, and for the most part, you can only glimpse this outer bright region of it. The molting inside of here, that brain-looking pattern in there, that's really difficult to see visually. You'd need a fairly large telescope to catch any of that. So, or if you've really gone high-end, you could use like one of the night vision adapters to catch more of it. The outer O3 shell, I would say, is practically impossible visually. You would need a crazy amount of aperture, nothing within the realms of amateur, I would say, to see that, because it is oxygen, an oxygen 3 portion, and it's blue. The eye is very, very low in sensitivity to those wavelengths of light, so that would be exceedingly faint to see visually. I would say I wouldn't bet anything that you'd be able to see it. So, but if you want to see the nebula itself and that structure, then a UHC or an O3 filter can be pretty good. So, Steve, if you have the L Extreme or the L Enhance, those both would knock it out of the park. So, especially if you're using a one-shot color camera. Let's see. Let's move on. Next one up. This is a great target right now. It's just starting to rise in the northeast part of the sky. This, of course, is the Bubble Nebula. The Bubble Nebula, or NGC 7635, is in Cassiopeia, and it's an emission nebula. There's a lot of other nebulas around this region. If you are using a really wide field or you're doing a mosaic, there's a ton of other stuff floating around here. This is really best for 600 millimeter or longer focal lengths if you're truly just trying to get the bubble itself. It's really kind of a cool object because you have a lot of extended details in here just around the bubble, and then the bubble itself is a beautiful little piece in the nebula. And it does well for both or color filters, LRGB sets, and it does really well in narrowband, especially if you're going to be doing Hubble palettes. The bubble has a lot of signal in all 3 channels to bring that out. So, and this is rising right now, so if you're looking for an object to shoot almost all night, the bubble is a very good consideration for that, especially if you've got a good northeast location. Visually, this is a difficult one visually. I've only glimpsed just the outer little shell, this bright portion right here in the bubble itself, and just the outer edge curve of the bubble. And that was in a 16-inch Dobsonian with a UHC filter. It's quite a challenge to actually see the bubble nebula without any, night vision adapted equipment there. So visually, this is really best suited for very dark skies, and the more aperture you can throw at it, the better to glimpse that visually. So kind of a challenge target. Visually, photographically, it's pretty easy. This was taken with a 6-inch Esprit 150 and just a hydrogen alpha filter, and even in short exposures, like less than a minute, you'll start to actually see it. Longer exposures, you'll start to get the extension of the dust and hydrogen gas in that region. So one of my favorites that's really good for this coming season and autumn that's coming up. This is a great target if you're looking for a project. Now to make sure we get not everything's nebulas up there. So this one is another great object that's coming up. It's in the constellation of Andromeda. This is NGC 891. It's an edge-on spiral galaxy. This one can be done in shorter focal length optics, photographically, depending on how big the sensor is. But it's not small, but it's not big either. So if you've got a longer focal length instrument, something like 800 millimeter to that 1000 millimeter sweet spot, this is a great target if you're looking to shoot a galaxy this fall. This is a good one that's actually starting to rise, as it gets darker and we push more towards the late evening. This is a good one to go after. It is a galaxy, so you're only going to be able to use visual filters, LRGB filters. Narrowband is pretty much worthless on galaxies unless they've got a lot of H2 hydrogen regions. Then you can use an H-alpha filter. This doesn't have too much of that in there at all, so narrowband is worthless on this. You just have to rely on getting that data the way it is. So that's a good one. Visually, this is a little bit more of a challenge. I would be hesitant to say you could see this in a light polluted location. If you can, you must be out of the glare and you've got a fair amount of aperture on it. From dark skies, though, if you've got a 12-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch telescope or bigger, then this is a fun one to go after. It's actually good if you've got like a Schmidt-Cassegrain, something with a little bit longer focal length, like a 9 1/4 or an 11 or even a 14 or bigger Schmidt. This is a cool one to go after because this galaxy does best with image scale and making it a little bit bigger. So that's a cool one to check out as well. And that is NGC 891. So that's a good one if you're looking for some galaxy time this autumn. All right. This is one that doesn't come up too often, but it's huge. This is the Sculptor Galaxy, NGC 253. This is in the constellation of Sculptor. It's a spiral galaxy. This is a big galaxy. Sculptor sits kind of low in the south from the northern hemisphere, so you can glimpse it. The further south you go, it'll be higher. But it's a lot bigger than most people think. You need a fair amount of field to catch something of this size. If you've got a 600 millimeter focal length scope somewhere in there, that'll be a healthy object to go after. It's just from where it sits in the sky, you don't have a ton of time to hit it. It's not as low as like Omega Centauri or anything like that, but it's still low in the southeast. Southeast, southwest as it's going through there. So, but this is another one that really does well with LRGB filters. There is, as you can see, these little pink regions in there. There is some H2 hydrogen regions in there, so you could do a little bit of H alpha time in there to get some of that out of there. But mostly you're going to be doing RGB and luminance, but it's a big galaxy, so be prepared for that. Visually, you can see it in a 6-inch telescope. Like I said, it is a larger galaxy. Dark skies help to get more of the detail. If you ever get a chance to get like a 20-inch telescope on this at a star party, you can start to get some of that molting detail inside of the galaxy itself. So it's a really cool one. It's a big galaxy. So try to check that one out. It's definitely worth taking a look at it. So those are just some objects to check out from the NGC catalog. Obviously, there's almost 8,000 objects in there, so good luck with it. There's tons of stuff in there. We could be there all day talking about it, but we're going to continue on with some of these other catalogs. Shortly after the NGC catalog came around, we also had some additions to the NGC catalog, and that was known as the Index Catalog, or IC. The original one, IC1, was published in 1895, and then the addition of IC2 was done in 1905. This is a total of 5,386 objects, and there are some overlap between NGC and ICs, but IC is kind of a fainter addition to the NGCs. Steve, what are you asking about? What filters to use on NGC 253, the Sculptor Galaxy? Just let me know and I'll catch it in there. But the IC is expansions from the NGC catalogs, and to see all the ICs, you're starting to get fairly faint in the IC catalog. So now we're jumping into 20-inch or bigger territory to catch them all. One of the most famous ones, of course, is IC 434, and that is, of course, now this is going to come up a couple times in this presentation as the Horsehead. I don't have any write-ups for all the filters right now, but you can go back and watch this later or shoot us an email. I'll go over that in a minute, and we'll talk about that after. So back to this. The Horsehead Nebula is a really popular object. This is going to come up multiple times in this presentation because it has multiple classifications. So IC 434 is actually the hydrogen region back here. The Horsehead's just part of it, but we're actually referring to this hydrogen portion right in here. The Flame Nebula is not part of this. That's an NGC. But this is IC 434 is referring to this hydrogen cloud back in here. Does really well with a H-alpha filter photographically. You can actually use the color filters if you're shooting monochrome. With RGB filters if you're doing monochrome, and if you have a one-shot color camera, then just use a light pollution filter and go after it. But it does well with narrowband as well, particularly hydrogen. There is a little bit of O3. There's not a lot of sulfur in this region if you're doing narrowband. Visually, I have seen this in a 6-inch telescope with an H-beta filter. It's a challenge with that. Adding some more aperture in there would be helpful. If you can get bigger aperture, kind of pushing into that 10, 12-inch class would be helpful in dark skies. But the H-beta or UHC filters visually would be helpful. This is a favorite of mine that's also coming up. It's in Cassiopeia. This is the bright star Navi, in Navi in Cassiopeia. It's the center star. But you have these two faint little ghosts of nebulas in here, and this is known as the Gamma Cassiopeia Nebula, or IC59 and IC63. They're emission nebulas. You can do really well with 400 millimeter or longer. If you shoot them longer focal length, you get some image scale. If you're shooting monochrome, they do come out in RGB filters, or if you're just using a color camera, you can just go after it with a light pollution filter. They do well with narrow bands, particularly H-alpha and O3 filters, but there's not much sulfur in there. If you're doing S2, it's not probably worth the time to do it, so stick with the HAO3. Visually, I have seen these. They're a fun challenge. I really like going after objects that have a bright contrasting star next to them, and these are one of those. You can do this in a 12-inch from dark skies, use a UHC or an O3 filter, but really take your time going back and forth to kind of move the field and let your eye kind of pick up on those dusty little portions here. The brighter of the two, I believe it's IC59, I think is this one. That's the one you're going to catch first. It's brighter than the other. So give that a shot. Photographically, as you can see in hydrogen alpha here, it does well. Or a narrowband filter will pull that out. So kind of a neat set of objects up there. But visually, they are a bit of a challenge, and you will need some decent aperture, probably 12-inch or bigger, to go after it. All right, this is probably one of the most sought-after targets in the wintertime. This is the Witchead Nebula, IC2118. I always butcher this constellation's name, Arandis. This is right off the bright star Rigel in the constellation of Orion. The nebula itself is just outside the boundaries of the Orion constellation, but it's just off of Rigel. This is a reflection nebula, so that means there is no narrowband filters that can help with this. This is all visible light, so if you're doing one-shot color, just go at it. And you're probably going to need a dark sky to do this because there's not going to be any aid really from a light pollution filter. It's just going to cut the light pollution down. If you're doing monochrome, you'll have to use LRGB filters and probably need a really good luminance channel to pull it out because it's so faint. But yeah, if you're doing hydrogen, I have pulled out subtle details in hydrogen, but there's not a lot of assistance from it. So this is really going to be just pounding it away on time. Visually, this can be seen in a variety of objects, but it's going to be quite difficult. Again, it's a reflection nebula. Reflection nebulas have no assistance from filters. So you really just need it's all about having good, dark, transparent skies, and that's it. So very, very challenging visually and photographically. This is really just an ultimately dark sky sight object. Extending past the ICs, we have the Herschel Catalog. Now, the Herschel Catalog was kind of the basic fundamentals originally of the NGC catalog, and then the NGCs came along and kind of incorporated, and they all got washed up inside the NGC catalog. But in the 1970s, an astronomy club in Florida kind of came together and went through the original 2,700 or so NGC objects that were originally from Herschel's, this is William Herschel's original observations, pulled those 2,700 odd objects, and they combed through them, getting to the best 400 of those objects, and that brings us to what's known as the Herschel 400. And there's actually, I think there's a Herschel 2 set now from another club that went through and added another collection of them. I think it's another 400 or so. This isn't like a research catalog like NGCs and ICs are. This is kind of a amateurly built and compiled catalog, but a lot of amateur astronomers like to use this Herschel 400 as a challenge. It's a lot like doing the Messier, catalog, all 110. If you're done with the Messiers and you want kind of a collection of objects to go after afterwards, the Herschel 400 is very popular. This is more of a visual challenge set than really photographic, because everything in the Herschel 400 is an NGC. So it's all covered under the NGC catalog. So if you're imaging, you're probably just going to go after the NGC number. But if you want like a If you're looking for a visual collection of objects that are more advanced than the Messier Catalog and you want a project to work on, the Herschel 400 is a very good one to go after. You can see most of them in a 6-inch telescope. A little bit more aperture would probably be helpful, but that's a fun one to go do if you're a visual person and you really want something to challenge you after you've done the Messiers. Then the Herschel 400 is a nice, well-organized collection to spend your time on, and it'll probably take a couple years to complete, depending on how active you are getting to dark skies. But I have a lot of people I've met who've worked on the Herschel 400 or completed it, and took quite a bit of time to do it. So that's really what the Herschel collection is. A similar collection to that is also the Caldwell Catalog. The Caldwells were published in 1995. This is another list composed from famous British astronomy author Sir Patrick Moore. And I think his middle name was Caldwell, so that's why that comes from the Caldwell. But he built a list of 109 objects beyond the Messiers. They're pretty much all NGCs as well. It's another collection of objects. There's actually a couple different books on the Caldwell Catalog. So if you want something to take out to the field, you want something that's a little bit more advanced than the Messier Catalog, but maybe you don't have time to go through all 8,000 objects of the NGCs and find every single one you want to look through. The Herschel 400 and the Caldwell catalogs kind of take the best of the NGC catalogs and kind of bring them to a nice digestible collection or group that if you want like an observing list, but maybe you don't have time to go after and do the research on it because life is busy and crazy, the Herschel 400 and the Caldwells are a really good set of objects to kind of advance up to. And this is, again, more of a visual collection because they're all under the NGC. If you're an astrophotographer, you're probably just going to go after the astrophotography list. But if you want some help and you might not know what to shoot and you want something that's a little bit off the beaten path, then maybe picking up the Herschel 400 or a book on the Caldwell objects might be kind of fun if you want to kind of go off and shoot some different targets instead of, the same old stuff. All right. So now that we've kind of covered the major players, we're going to start dipping into more of the exotic stuff. One of my personal favorites is the Barnard Catalog. These are generally labeled with B before the object number. Barnard Catalog was compiled and published in 1927 by E. Barnard. He was kind of one of the spearheads for modern day astrophotography. He used glass plates on a 10 and 13-inch telescope to photograph selected regions of the night sky. Total of those are 369 objects, which he listed. They are dark nebulas or regions of dust that are fairly dense, blocking or obscuring background stars. And they're quite elegant and beautiful targets, but they are challenging to see, especially visually. You can do them from a 6-inch you can do it with a 6-inch telescope, but the key to dark nebulas, the key to visually seeing dark nebulas is dark, transparent skies. So darkness isn't the only thing you need. You need a location that's going to provide a very transparent location to give you really good clarity in the night sky. That's generally a location that's obviously dark, but higher altitude locations can give you the better transparency to see some of this. And like I said, the Horsehead does come back in this catalog. And we're going to start that off right here. Of course, earlier we talked about IC 434, which was all this. Now we're just talking about the Horsehead, which is the little black dark pillar in there that looks like a horse head. That is known as B33 or Barnard 33. It's in the constellation Orion, just next to the star Alnitak in the belt. Imaging-wise, the Horsehead region, you can shoot it in all different focal lengths, 400 millimeter or longer, depending on how you want to frame it up and how big the chip is. One-shot color cameras, you can either go at it with just the color camera itself, a light pollution filter can help, or you can use those multi-band, narrowband filters to really aid in helping pull that detail out. If you are using a monochrome camera, then LRGB filters can be helpful, or narrowband H-alpha O3, and there is some S2 in there, but not much to get the outer region there. The Horsehead's going to show up automatically because it's a dark nebula. It's there, and there's no filter that's really going to help pull it out. A hydrogen alpha filter like you see here will make that really, really easy photographically. Visually, on the other hand, the Horsehead Nebula is relatively small in comparison to IC434, all the extra hydrogen here. You're looking for just this little smudge. Now, the best way I can describe viewing the Horsehead, because this comes up every winter, I have people call in and they're like, how do I see the Horsehead? Well, here's how you do it. The Horsehead is like looking for a black thumbprint on black paper. It's very faint. And the best way to really go about it is dark skies, a decent amount of aperture. I've done it in a 10-inch. I think a 16 does a little bit better, but a really good H-beta filter is really the trick to see it, and it's still fairly faint to catch it. This is an object, if you're going after the Horsehead visually, it takes a lot of patience. If you can get Alnitak, that bright star, out of the field, that's very helpful as well, just to get the glare out. But a good H-beta, you can use a UHC filter because it does pass H-beta, but it's really best suited to doing H-beta filters to go for it. So if you really want a visual challenge, the Horsehead Nebula is something that comes up every winter. It's very easy photographically, but it's a challenge visually. Moving on in there. This is another region. This is actually up in the nighttime sky right now in the northern hemisphere. This is the Snake Nebula, which you can see right in here. There's a bunch of other ones in here. You can see all the dark nebulas floating around in here. Let's see, Jonathan, why H-beta filter rather than H-alpha for the Horsehead? H-alpha would be used if you're doing photography. H-beta is used visually. The human eye is more sensitive in the green, and that's where H-beta peaks. So H-alpha filters are not really good for visual work. Our eye just doesn't pull out light in that wavelength. So an H-beta shows you the same thing, but in a different bandpass or different wavelength. So H-beta is generally used for visual. H-alpha is generally used for photographic. So Snake Nebula, B72, constellation Ophiuchus. It's another dark nebula. There's a lot of really elegant tendrils of dust in this region. This is a really good wide field target. This was actually taken with a Canon 200mm f2.8 telephoto, so in a monochrome camera. So a good wide field lens will work well. If you're doing imaging, you can do one-shot colors work well. If you're working with that, a light pollution filter I find is very, very helpful. I don't like color of these objects. I think black and white does it the best to pull because it's all about contrast. So just doing a black and white shot I think really helps pull out these. But again, like reflection nebulas, there's no filter to get you through it. Visually, you can do this in a 6-inch telescope. I don't know why I have H-beta or UHC in there, so you can just ignore that for this. There's no helping you here. You just need dark skies. That's it. So all dark nebulas are pretty much dark skies, good transparency. That's it. Next one up here. This is actually the Cocoon Nebula, which is also nice and high right now in Cygnus. But what's cool about the Cocoon is it has all this elegant trailing of dark nebulas behind it. This is another Canon 200mm telephoto shot. This is B168, which is actually referring to this area. We're not really worried about the Cocoon Nebula down here, but you can go after the Cocoon in its own right. It's an IC target, so go check that out. This is up in Cygnus. This is really well done in wide field optics. You know, like I said, this is 200 millimeter telephoto. You can do it with a one-shot color and a light pollution filter, or if you're doing imaging with a monochrome camera, you can use RGB or light pollution filters to kind of help. And then, of course, visually, this is a fainter one. So visually, you would need a very, very dark sky, very good contrast to catch this nebula region. If you want to go after the cocoon, an H-beta filter visually will help. Photographically, it does really well in standard one-shot color, or you can do some narrowband or RGB work on just the cocoon nebula here. So that's a separate object from the dark nebula we're talking about. Next up on the list here, I know we're kind of running out of time, so I'll try to run through these so we have time. The next one is the Sharpless Catalog. This is a collection of emission nebulas that are spanned throughout the sky. It was originally published in 1953 and updated in 1959 with a total of 313 hydrogen objects, also known as H2 regions in the night sky. These are generally very large nebulas that are located throughout the sky. Very, very good for hydrogen alpha or narrowband filters for photographic. And again, these are all very large emission nebulas, and generally wide field refractors, binoculars from dark skies will help. You can send larger aperture after it. Right here we have the California Nebula, which is also an IC. I think it's IC 1499, I think is what it is. But that would be Sharpless 220. So that's a cool one that you can go do. This is actually a good one to use or photograph in the autumn as well. Most emission nebulas, if you're doing photography, a H-alpha filter is going to be good. And if you're doing visual, H-beta is the filter you'd want to use for a lot of emission nebulas. So one of the biggest ones that is in the nighttime sky, and a lot of these are huge. This is a 1, 2, 3, 4. This is my 5-panel mosaic of this region. As you can see, there's the Horsehead, there's Orion, but encompassing all of that is what's known as the Barnard Loop. And the Barnard Loop, or SH2-276, this is a huge, huge target. It spans almost the entire length of the constellation of Orion. This is really something that you need a telephoto lens, like a 50 millimeter or an 85. Or if you're going to go after it with a telescope, you're going to be doing a mosaic to get the field that it takes to cover all of this. So this is a massive object for photographic use. Visually, binoculars, if you can find a way to put an H-beta filter on binoculars or a really wide field refractor with low power to pan through this is something to check out. In the darkest of skies, I've actually heard of people holding up an H-beta filter to their eye and simply looking through it and being able to see the loop there. But this is something that it would take you actually have to pan through the field to see it because it's so big. So and that's the truth with most of the the Sharpless objects. Most of them are very wide objects, very big, taking up a lot of sky. So mosaics or wide field optics are going to be needed for photography purposes. Another one here. This is really difficult photographically. It takes a lot of time. This is called the Spaghetti Nebula, also known as Simeis 147. This is in the constellation of Taurus, also known as Sharpless 240. This is a monster supernova remnant. It's actually in the horns of Taurus, not far from M1, but it's huge, almost over 3 degrees field. What's very cool about this nebula is there's a lot of very elegant tendrils and ribbons that flow through here, but it takes a substantial amount of time to catch the data that you need to bring out this. And this is a couple hours worth of exposure time, and it still needs more time. to pull more data out. This is really good for wide field telescopes, big sensors if you want to do it, or telephoto lenses. One-shot color cameras, if you're going to go after this, you're going to be spending a long time exposing to get this to come out. Ideally, you'd want like a L-enhance or these multi-narrowband filters if you're shooting with a one-shot color. If you are shooting with a monochrome camera with LRGB filters, tons of exposure time is going to be needed. The best way to pull this out, quote-unquote, quickly is with like a H-alpha filter. This is with an H-alpha. Most of it's hydrogen because it's a supernova remnant. So this is probably 6 to 10 hours worth of exposure in hydrogen. Faster telescopes can help you get through that as well. Visually, this is probably up there with one of the most difficult things to see. It is visible, but what you're going to be seeing is not all the faint details, but you're probably going to go after some of the brighter, like this portion right here and this portion over here, the brighter clumps inside the nebula. But you are going to need a H-beta filter, very careful observation, a fair amount of aperture in dark skies to catch this. This is a major challenge object visually, and even photographically it's pushing that. Another set of objects, we're going to start shortening this here real quick as we go through because they're going to get more exotic. We have the Abell Catalog, and this is broken up into a couple pieces. The first one is the Abell Catalog of Rich Clusters of Galaxies. These are usually listed as Abell. Sometimes you'll see it as A or ARO, but normally this says Abell. Originally published in 1958 for the Northern Hemisphere and 1989 for the Southern Hemisphere. About over 4,000 clusters of galaxies. This is really good for if you've got a little bit more narrow field of view, because we are shooting galaxy clusters now. One-shot color cameras can be used with this, some light pollution filters, and if you're doing monochrome RGB filters, no narrowband's going to help you here, so it's just time and dark skies, because you're shooting clusters of galaxies, so very distant, fairly faint targets, and it's the same goes for visual work as well. Larger aperture, dark skies is going to help because there's a bunch of faint, as you can see here, a bunch of faint little details in here. And the larger the telescope and the darker the skies, you'll probably find that you're going to just continuously go fainter and fainter, seeing more and more galaxies. Now, another part of the Abell Catalog is the Abell Catalog of Planetary Nebulas. This is probably my favorite for planetaries. These are generally listed as Abell or ARO. If you're using Sky Safari, it can list it as an ARO object. Published in 1966. There are only 86 nebulas in this catalog, but they're fairly difficult to see. They've got some really elegant detail. Some of them are really stunning. Very, very faint. And a lot of them have a lot of oxygen-3 in them, like you can see in Abell 31 here. You can see it's relatively blue. So that means there's a lot of O3 in there. You're going to probably need something about 800 millimeters or longer, depending on the chip size, because these are kind of small. You can do this with a one-shot color, light pollution filter, or if you're monochrome RGB filters, but they really come out well if you've got some narrowband help with like an O3 filter or something like that. Visually, again, dark skies. Some of them are easier than others. There's only 86 of them, so it's kind of fun to go through. You can do some of them in a 10-inch telescope. Some of the more difficult ones require a 20-inch or larger from a good location. So that's a really fun one if you like planetary nebulas and you're really after the hunt. The Abell planetaries can be really, really interesting. The last one that I've got images on is the Lynds Catalog of Bright Nebula, or LBNs. Now you're really jumping off the deep end with these. These nebulas are really stunning on there with that, because there's a lot of very faint stuff built into there. So there's a lot of really cool things in that region. So the Lynds, the LBNs are fairly faint. They're going to take a lot of exposure time. Visually, they're pretty well detailed there. So that's a pretty cool one to see as well. But visually, these are going to be very difficult if not pushing the very edge of the limitations there. So this is more of a photographic collection. Let's see. Yes, Angry Bot. That I had to go back and look, but yes, that's not Abell 31. I should have checked into that more, but Abell 31 actually looks like this. That's Abell 31 right there. So I'll have to go back and check it. So if you're watching this again, that's not Abell 31. I apologize. But go back and check that out. So let's see. All right, other catalogs, just real quick. Just to pound this out, we have the Caldwell Catalog. This is wide field, open star clusters. But this is a cool one to go after if you're into binoculars and stuff like that. There is the Caldwell Catalog. Check that out. Definitely worth it if you're into binoculars and really, really wide field stuff. You have the Vandenberg. These are really, really faint emission nebulas. These are really challenging, more in the photography world. If you're doing visual, you might be able to do it, but you'll have to kind of go object by object. The Gum nebulas. This is mostly southern hemisphere. You find a lot of these, but it was a nebula survey, and there's a lot of really large nebulas in there. So definitely another set of nebulas to take a look at. Berkeley or BE, these are really difficult, fairly faint open clusters of star clusters, so that's another one to look out. Sticking on star clusters, favorite of mine, if you're really looking for a visual challenge and you like globular clusters, is the Palomar clusters. The Palomar clusters is a very short collection of globular clusters that were found during the Palomar Sky Survey. I think in like the 60s or something like that. But it's a very small list of clusters, but they're fairly faint objects. There's only 15 of them. So if you want a small collection and you want to go after some globular clusters, the Palomar collection is something to go take a look at. Like I said, there's only 15 of them. In order to see all 15, you're probably going to need at least a 20-inch to get some of them. Some of them are easier than others, but when you get to like Palomar 13 and stuff like that, they can be difficult. And some of them don't really resemble a globular because they're kind of spread out. So that's another fun one. So that's really all I've got. Like I said, that really does it for today's talk. Hopefully that gives you enough to jump off into the deep end about it. But there's a ton of catalogs out there. The whole purpose of today was really to encourage anybody to, do some research. Go look at some of the sky surveys. Pull out a sky atlas or dig into the nighttime sky a little bit. There are thousands of amazing objects out there to go see. The Messiers are fantastic, but, everybody shoots it or talks about it. And I want to encourage people to kind of, spread out. Don't be afraid to try different targets and jump off into the deep end of the night sky and really start pushing what you can do with your equipment, both photographically and visually. So hopefully this was kind of eye-opening. If you have any other questions, you can always email us at support@skywatcherusa.com. Be happy to help anybody out there. If you do write to us and you have questions on the webcast, just write up "What's up, Webcast?" If you like the channel, go ahead and subscribe. Next week, we're actually going to be talking about observing from light-polluted locations and how to, kind of the opposite of what we did today, and how to adapt your observing style to the location that you're in and making the most out of where you're at, rather than just being like, oh, I can't go out and view because it's not dark. Well, of course you can. And we're going to kind of talk about how to go about doing that. So that's next week. The week after that, we're doing a full episode on the Esprit triplet series. So that's going to be really cool. We'll be talking about our Esprit refractors. And then our special guest speaker at the end of the month is Vic Maris from Stellar View. He's a good friend of ours, so we're going to have him on as well. I know we went a little long. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and answer them. I know we had one earlier that says, how do you determine which filters to use if you don't have any prior photographers to reference, or photographs to reference? Pretty much everything in the nighttime sky can be shot with a one-shot color or a monochrome camera using LRGB filters. If it's an emission nebula, emission nebulas tend to do well with narrowband filters, so your hydrogen alpha, O3, S2, those filters can be helpful when working with emission nebulas. So it's kind of just understanding the object and target that you're shooting that can help you justify which filters to actually use for it. So most galaxies just stick with color, one-shot color or LRGB. One-shot colors, using a regular light pollution filter can be helpful just to kind of cut down light pollution. Reflection nebulas, there's really no hope. You just have to pound away with time. Dark nebulas, I actually like shooting a dark nebula from town with a light pollution filter, but just doing black and white because it's all about that contrast detail in the star field. I don't worry too much about color when I'm shooting a dark nebula. And in fact, I feel like color, when you're shooting a dark nebula, gets in the way and it's distracting from a lot of those faint details in there. So what I found works is get a nice monochrome camera and then put a light pollution filter like an L Pro from Optolong, or I have a Chroma low glow filter that works really well, and I just shoot it that way, and it really helps pop that out. So that's understanding how and what filters to use, just kind of takes trial and error. You can always go on AstroBin and just search out the target and see what other people have shot that with and kind of get some inspiration from there as well. And if you have any questions, you can always write us at support@skywatcherusa.com, and we'll do what we can to help you there. So hopefully that answered any questions. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so if you have anything else, either say it now or, again, write to us at support@skywatcherusa.com. Title it What's Up Webcast and just fire your question away. If you like the channel, go ahead and subscribe. It keeps you up to date with what we're doing on the channel. Other than that, I hope everybody has a great weekend. Stay safe. The moon is going down. It's still a little bright, so try to enjoy the weekend, and we are moving to darker skies. So stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll catch you all next week. So clear skies, everyone.